Awakening from the dark chaos, the young man, Ren Xiaosu, wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked at the 13 or 14-year-old boy at the door. Lu Yuan, is there something wrong? Ren Xiaosu asked. The boy referred to as Lu Yuan was actually named Yen Lu Yuan. Yen Lu Yuan looked harmless to both humans and animals, appearing very innocent, yet he held a bone knife in his hand, guarding the door. It was late at night, and he looked very tired but never closed his eyes because he was on night watch. Yen Lu Yuan shook his head and said, "No, what's wrong with your head? Can't the doctors in the town figure out what's wrong? You don't need to worry about this. It's not a disease," Ren Xiaosu said decisively. "It's almost dawn. I'm going to hunt. You sleep a bit and go to school on time." "Okay," Yen Lu Yuan nodded dully. "What's the use of studying well in this wasteland? I said it's useful, then it's useful," Ren Xiaosu said in an unquestionable tone. "I also want to go hunting," Yen Lu Yuan pouted. "Who will keep watch at night if something happens to you? Me in a coma?" Ren Xiaosu stood up to fetch water from the town center. "It's not so dangerous in town at dawn. The night here is a lawless land." The gloomy sky was filled with rolling clouds, and a drop of acid rain finally fell from the cloud layer. It swayed in the strong wind and finally fell in front of Ren Xiaosu with a plop. Ren Xiaosu, lying on the wasteland, frowned and thought that his luck wasn't good today. The game hadn't arrived yet, but the acid rain had. Some people say that one must be careful of wild beasts when walking on this wasteland, but Ren Xiaosu thought that this person didn't tell the whole truth because there were many other things on this wasteland that could kill people, one of which was acid rain. However, Ren Xiaosu still didn't move. If there was no game today, he and Yen Lu Yuan would starve to death before the acid rain brought disease. Suddenly, there was a sound of bird wings flapping the air. Ren Xiaosu's eyes widened suddenly, but his breath remained steady. Not far in front of Ren Xiaosu, he propped up a black iron pot with a tree branch, and under the iron pot, he sprinkled a little bit of black bread crumbs. The big bird landed next to the iron pot and looked around warily, with sharp eyes. The size of this bird was not much smaller than the iron pot. It stood in place grooming its feathers for a long time, while Ren Xiaosu continued to wait without moving. It seemed that the big bird finally let down its guard and slowly moved towards the iron pot, its steps as delicate as a thief's, but as soon as it entered the range of the iron pot and was about to peck at the bread crumbs, Ren Xiaosu suddenly pulled hard on the rope in his hand. Then the young man jumped up and rushed towards the iron pot like a runaway wild donkey. He pressed the iron pot firmly with his body before the big bird could overturn it. Huff! Ren Xiaosu let out a sigh of relief. He had been waiting for this sparrow for a whole night, but thankfully, his efforts today were not in vain. Such good opportunities are not available every day. The sound of the sparrow struggling under the iron pot, the hard wings rubbing against the iron pot to make a sharp sound, the sound of the clock in the shelter barrier came melodiously at this time. Ren Xiaosu looked back and wondered when he would be able to bring Yen Lu Yuan into the shelter barrier. For Ren Xiaosu, the people inside the shelter barrier were happy because they didn't have to face the dangers of the wasteland, but it's not a place where anyone can enter if they want to. At this time, the movement in the iron pot finally became much smaller. He sighed and confirmed that the rag on his hand had been wrapped properly, and then slowly lifted the iron pot to reveal a small gap. Ren Xiaosu's hand reached into the gap, trying to grab the leg of this big sparrow, but life will not always be smooth sailing. As soon as Ren Xiaosu's hand reached in, he cried out in pain. Ren Xiaosu pulled back his hand and saw that his tiger's mouth was bleeding. The rag didn't block the sharp beak of the big sparrow. Ren Xiaosu was angry. He simply took off his ragged coat and wrapped it around his hand. His palm suddenly stretched into the iron pot. This time he caught the neck of the sparrow in one go. He simply pulled the sparrow out and tucked it under his arm, twisted it hard, and the sparrow's neck made a click and never moved again. At this time, Ren Xiaosu suddenly felt heartache because his coat was poked with several holes by the big sparrow's claws. Suddenly, there was a bang in his mind, and Ren Xiaosu knelt on the ground. It was as if a huge bronze bell was ringing in his head, and he fell into the dark chaos. Damn, the usual illness only came at midnight. This time it came early. This wasn't his first seizure. Almost everyone in the town knew that his brain was a bit problematic, and he would have pain attacks from time to time, but Ren Xiaosu knew very well that it was not pain, but pure chaos. Wait, this time is different from the past. The black fog in his mind actually opened, revealing a palace inside. Ren Xiaosu suddenly opened his eyes, looked at himself incredulously, and said, "I woke up so quickly this time." He originally had the opportunity to take a good look at the appearance of the palace, but he knew more clearly that falling into a coma in such a wilderness was tantamount to suicide. He must now rush back to the town outside the 113 shelter barrier before the acid rain arrives completely. Ren Xiaosu tied the two claws of the sparrow and hung them on his shoulder, then picked up his big iron pot and turned it upside down on his head and started running wildly. The raindrops hit the iron pot and made a da-da-da sound. This time, the iron pot became his umbrella. However, before he ran far, there was a figure standing in front of him holding a bone knife. "Give me the game." But before the man could finish his sentence, he saw a huge iron pot coming closer and closer in his field of vision, and it hit him hard in the face. Grass! The robber fell backward. He didn't expect Ren Xiaosu to act so decisively. And so strong. Ren Xiaosu saw that the robber hadn't even fallen to the ground, and he was already running away. The robber lay on his back, with the acid rain hitting his face causing a slight sting. He was a bit confused. Aren't people usually supposed to have some communication? How many such situations has this young man encountered to have such an instinctive reaction? No, the sound of that young man's footsteps is getting closer again. The robber hurriedly sat up and turned his head to look. He actually saw that the young man had turned back. Ren Xiaosu was not planning to come back originally, but he clearly heard a voice in the palace in his mind. Task, give the game to others. Who's talking? Ren Xiaosu walked back towards the robber with doubt. The robber was panicked. We can talk about it. No, I'm the victim. Ren Xiaosu looked at the robber closely. There was no one else nearby. Do you want this sparrow? Ren Xiaosu asked. The robber's eyes lit up. Yes. Here you go. Ren Xiaosu stuffed the sparrow into the other's arms without saying a word. The strange and neutral voice sounded again. Task completed. Reward basic skill learning map. Can learn other people's abilities. Ren Xiaosu was stunned because he clearly felt that there was an extra piece of parchment in his mind. Skill learning map. Does that mean he can use this to directly copy other people's abilities? Hunting? Survival? Or something else? The robber held the huge sparrow tightly in his arms and was about to say some words of thanks. You're a good person. Before he could finish his sentence, he saw Ren Xiaosu pull the sparrow back and leave the robber. He watched Ren Xiaosu run away. What kind of people are these? What are they up to?